I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency for January 7th, 2009. May we have the roll call, please?
Agency members: Raymond.
Here.
Quintero. Here. Weaver.
Here.
Yusefian.
Here.
Chairman Najarian.
Here. May we have your report?
The agenda for the January 7th, 2009 special special meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Wednesday, December 31st, 2008 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. And just as a reminder to everyone, it's a special meeting because this meeting is being held on Wednesday.
Exactly. Next item, please.
Approval of minutes.
So moved. Second.
With no objections or corrections, the minutes will be approved as submitted. Next item, please.
All communication discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the redevelopment agency may question or respond to a speaker, but there will be no debate or decision, and the matter may be referred to staff through the executive director for an investigation and a report.
Herbert.
Got that memorized now.
Herbert Milano.
After 4 years. Doesn't have to read it anymore.
Chairman Najarian, Happy New Year to you. Members of the Redevelopment Agency, city staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I brought again with me the city's budget because it has a picture of the Americana on it, and of course the capital improvement program has a prevalent picture of the Americana, and the CAFR also has a picture of the Americana, and I'm sure that the redevelopment report also has a picture of the Americana in it, and all kinds of other additional pictures. And so I looked around through these documents to see if I would find one overall performance outcome on the Americana. And I haven't found one. I did make a California Records Act request on all of the properties that were purchased to assemble the Americana. It was $86 million. Not counting all the other ancillary costs that eventually came from the taxpayer. I would imagine that a performance indicator on how the Americana has performed, or what our expenditures are year to year in a separate document, would be relevant for a redevelopment agency to present. Even though it could be in umpteen different funds, it would be nice for the public to know, what did we vote for? So it is my hope that the redevelopment agency would present on a yearly basis, especially after the end of the fiscal year, a true performance outcome of all the relevant expenses with regard to the Americana, all the revenues, the expenditures. And with regard to the revenues, I'm a bit perplexed with regard to the change that was made with regard to parking, whether the new fees imposed on the public for parking is being shared by the city, or at least the revenues are, and whether they're going to be shared in the same way as the other parking structures are, where you get a monthly check, I believe as a percentage of the gross. But it would be interesting if we can get an explanation of how that additional income may come in to offset at least some of the costs that were incurred in creating this fabulous center here. As I visited the Americana twice this past holiday, and of course the areas were blocked off because the Trojan marching band did quite a job on the grass. But I keep looking at the whole area that supposedly was a public area, and for all intents and purposes, the way I see it is it's pretty much a Caruso affiliated area for purposes of enhancing the experience of the shopper. At the end of the day, we still don't have the vision that we had back in the 1990s to have a large urban park. January the 15th, the city begins to receive the bids on the adult recreation center. And so I keep in mind what happened 4 years ago, and some of you were running for office, and the promises that were made, the assurances that I was given one-on-one with regard to preserving as large an area in the Central Park. Because all the data that we have and all of the intentions and all of the plans call for a corresponding open area, recreational area, that would compensate for that significant density that we had and we can expect. Now, this adult recreation center will have, to my dismay, a road next to it within the park, even though there's Louis Street right next to that. And as we look at the overall needs of all the additional residents that are coming in, I am pleading with you to reconsider at least the placement of that building so you can maximize the use of the open space as you now begin to take bids and before you break ground. Because the city needs its own large open space for civic functions that are under the city's purview to control and promote. Well, the Americana Park is under the control of Rick Caruso. We need a large open space, we need gardens, we need walkways, for the significant increase in population that we've had in the center of the city. So it is my hope that the City Council, and maybe through redevelopment, you reconsider expanding the possibilities to increase that open space. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other cards. Oral communications is closed. Mr. Weaver.
And Mr. Sturbert, would you again explain the philosophy this council, previous councils had in terms of develop the Americana? In other words, it wasn't about the dollar and cents. It was a different philosophy implied or employed this time, correct? You've said it many times.
Well, I'll repeat what I've said before, and that is that, and I mentioned this during both the 33433 report, or public hearing as it's technically noted, as well as other hearings before the council, where the issue of the direct economic return of the center was in some respects criticized versus the investment in land. And my comment has consistently been that this center is not entirely about the pure economic return of the city, but the intangibles and tangibles that result when you have this kind of an attraction and boost in a downtown area. And we referenced that again in the report that Phil brought, that reflected that even if what you look at is the direct measurable economic impacts, this center seems to be providing a tremendous boost to the downtown area in a time that's very difficult. In fact, both direct revenues as well as indirect economic benefits, we believe, attributed to the Americana are rather sizable.
And that's in spite of the economy at this point in time.
It might have been better, certainly would have been better had it not been for the Americana, but as we look at what's happening in downtown and with the Galleria, what we attribute the change and difference to the fact that Glendale seems to be faring better than other comparable communities, especially neighboring ones, is the Americana.
Thank you.
Mr. Youssef.
Question for either Phil or for Jim. At what point do we know, I think I asked this question privately from you a little bit earlier, which is at what point do we know how much and when do we get paid for our share of the parking revenues? And also, it is my understanding you really don't know how a center does unless they've been around for at least a year. And I want to also know at what point we collect our tax increments from the property taxes, or do we even do we get it this year? Did we get some of it last year? When do we see any of this money, with the exception of the sales tax, which I guess that happens to the Board of Equalization, but outside of that, the rest of the stuff, when do we see that?
Well, I'll have to ask Phil to fill in relative to the agreement on how often we look at the financials for the project and all of that arrangement on the sharing of profits. Property tax revenues, I'm not sure how much of the project is currently on the rolls, but it usually takes a couple of years for everything to completely, in terms of improvements, to get on the rolls. So given that the center was open in May, no doubt there was some assessment that probably happened the following assessment year, but there could be potentially appeals of the assessments by Crusoe affiliated, although we have a minimum, I think, in the development agreement below which you cannot appeal. But it usually takes a couple of years for you to really see a stabilized both property tax as well as, frankly, a sales tax out of a center. And the fact that we're opening in this economy, the sales tax revenues, who knows before we're going to see a stabilized economic profile on this center. It could be quite a long time.
And I think that answers the second two questions. The first you asked about the parking. In the ground lease, there is a provision that the redevelopment agency share 50-50 with Caruso the proceeds of parking after costs are paid. So there's a report that is due within 120 days following the end of their fiscal year. They work on a calendar year. So within 120 days, we'll get a report of what those costs are for parking, what the revenues were, and then there's a split.
Also, in our agreement with Mr. Caruso, he was going to pay for one police officer, if I'm not mistaken. How does that?
It was the provision was for traffic, to pay for an officer for traffic, I think. Is that what you're referring to?
No, I specifically remembered when we said we're going to build the center, we were going to provide some police officers. It required some police officers for that area. And Mr. Caruso stood in here and he says he would pay for one police officer. And I think that was included in our DDA. So I just want to know.
It wasn't included in the DDA, and if I remember correctly, the offer was as long as that officer would patrol
Only that,
Americana.
right.
Right. What we've done when there was need for security, we've referenced the pep rally recently, and in the opening, we have billed Caruso affiliated for those services for which they've paid the city.
Because no matter when I go there, there's at least 2 to 4 officers at least at Americana all the time. And they're able to keep the place running very orderly. So I just was wondering. That's all. Thank
I'm
you.
sensing that there's an interest to get into this perhaps a little further. Is there not something coming back to us aside from the sales tax information we received 2 weeks ago?
There's a substation there, right?
No?
There, in the back, or is that just?
No, I'm just saying, I don't
substation.
think we anticipated bringing another report back beyond what you received a month ago when we talked about.
Don't
Is
we
there
have
a
a
desire?
Yes,
substation?
we do have a substation there.
Is there a desire, and let's frame the issues that we'd like to have come back to us.
I don't see anything.
The parking issues, the police issues, anything else with regard to the operations and management?
Not interested in seeing anything, at least for a year. We opened in May in a bad economy, and we're trying to break it down and try to determine every little thing that's going on, every dollar we're supposed to get. Can't we give them a year at least?
Well, a lot of this is just general information. For instance,
clarification.
when will the parking
Okay,
revenue start?
then how about a
That's-
report to note and file?
That's easy. We can give you an update on what was in the development agreement relative to these specific costs, as well as there is a reporting requirement and eventually could be profit sharing relative to the overall center. Then there's a separate sharing agreement on I'll call it excess revenues that come from parking, and we'll bring that to you so you're aware of that. It's been a while since we've looked at it.
Yeah, it looks like we'd like to get into it. Mr.
Mr. Chair, when do we anticipate seeing you mentioned the sales tax. When do we see that coming back for fourth quarter?
This year?
Fourth quarter probably would not come until probably April, maybe May.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have no items on the new business agenda. Authority member and staff comments. Anything left unsaid, Mr. Raymond?
I'll park my comment here, since the other was not an agendized discussion. We've just been down an unagendized road, I guess. Our first of 2009. First of many, I'm sure. Anyway, I just wanted to mention the reason for my request isn't an implication that something is wrong or amiss. I wasn't a part of the council that negotiated this deal nor voted on it. I just simply want to be able to respond to the myriad of constituents that come to me and ask, how are we doing? And it's not a matter of judging it or a final judgment or whatever. It's just, in terms of Americana, I grew up in a retail business. I'd also like to know how it's doing relative to all the other areas in the city. I'd also like to know how they're doing. And lastly, Mr. Chair, prior to my running for office, and Councilmember Yusefian will remember this, and you all were discussing, the rest of the council was discussing Americana. I met with Mr. Yusefian when I was president of the Montreux Shopping Park Association and asked him if he would keep an eye, as an elected official, keep an eye on how retail in our city was doing vis-a-vis Americana and so on, and all of the other retail areas in the city to make sure that the wheels don't come off. and the assurance that I received from him and ultimately from other council members was, yes, we intend to do that. Now I find myself in the position of being an elected official sitting on this dais. I wouldn't ask less of myself than I did at that time of Mr. Yusefian. So I'd like to see those figures.
Very good. I'll have them come back to us. There's nothing else?
Will we adjourn?
Okay.
We are adjourned.